Um, this section is led by somebody who's something of a specialist on the subject, Amelia Smith from the Mekong Club. And I'll leave you to introduce your panelists, Amelia.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's panel on limits to access to remedy for migrant workers. So I'd like to bring your attention to the poll on the screen or in your app, which you can participate in via your Zoom apps. We'll be collecting the results throughout the session today. So my name is Amelia Smith from the Mekong Club out in Hong Kong, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by both Dr. Lara Bianchi and Charles Nice, who I will ask to introduce themselves in a moment. Access to remedy is a topic really close to my heart. For many years in my career, I managed a global grievance mechanism program covering 2,000 work sites across 11 countries. So between Charles, Lara, and I, we do certainly have a lot of opinions on this topic. So I suppose I want to kick off this session today by saying that we've had a lot of great discussions during the conference about different mechanisms under the worker voice and remedy umbrella. So particularly surrounding data, how we extract data, how we use data, how we share data, and particularly how we are designing these mechanisms for the insights that we can all use as practitioners, as brands, as industry. So I suppose Lara, Charles, and I, we would really like to take this half an hour that we have here, just this short session, to recenter the conversation more around the actual experiences of the input users using these types of mechanisms for remedy that we are designing, the experiences of the workers themselves. Because the elephant in the room, as we all know, is while these mechanisms are supposed to be designed to help workers seek remedy, they often fail. They fail to actually help migrant workers access meaningful remedy, and instead they often get lost in their purposes as tools for data extraction and, of course, monetary value creation from that data. So without further ado, let's bring the attention back to our esteemed panelists for today. I'll pass the floor to Lara and Charles to introduce themselves before we kick off our discussion.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lara. I'm an associate professor at the University of Nottingham, and in the last few years, I've been studying access to remedy with a specific focus on non-state-based access to remedy, so anything that comes from multi-stakeholder initiatives or businesses themselves. I have to say that I'm based at a business school, so my mission is to support and help business people to navigate the space of access to remedy, which is definitely very complex and probably the underdog in the business and human rights agenda. And I think there is a lot of work to do for respecting workers' rights and providing remedy after possible abuses.
And good afternoon and good morning to the people online. My name is Charles Nice. I work with the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers. So we're headquartered in the US. We're the Catholic Church's missionary society abroad. And so I work in Taichung in Taiwan, where we run a migrant shelter and center. I've been there 6 years. So actually I live in the migrant shelter with all the migrant workers that have their issues, and I build out our migrant help desk. And one of the initiatives we do is we raise the voices of workers to the grievance mechanisms of the brands and buyers to try to get remedies. So we have a lot of experience connecting the workers to the people that can make a difference in their factories.
Great, thank you both. So Lara, I wanted to start with you. You recently created a knowledge exchange hub that's just gone live. It's on access to remedy for migrant workers. So anyone in the audience who'd like to look this up, it is live now. Lara, your research shows that grievance mechanisms often are disconnected from workers' lived realities. Why do you think that is?
So yes, I think the disconnection is actually twofold, is between workers' lived experiences and grievance mechanisms, but also between businesses and grievance mechanisms. And if we can have the slide, please. I gather, of course, the experience in the room around recruitment is just amazing, and it's there, but not necessarily, I guess, all of you would be familiar with the access to remedy process. You can see the QR code. There is the knowledge exchange hub that Amelia was mentioning, and that I just went live thanks to the work of my colleague Tina Davis and the research we have done in the last few years. You see the process of access to remedy and grievances are just one piece of the puzzle. And I think one of the disconnection is precisely for businesses to understand that grievances are not a tick box exercise, completely disconnected from the actual outcome and the access to remedy in itself. The outcome should be twofold. There should be an outcome for workers, of course, the remediation in itself, and then the outcome for businesses, which is and should be organizational learning. And you see a couple of words in italics on the screen. Meaningful engagement. I think yesterday Arti made a point on this concept being a loaded concept. We don't know exactly what it means to have a meaningful stakeholder engagement. And if you can't fall asleep tonight, I wrote an academic paper recently on the ethical foundation of meaningful engagement. But if I had to summarize the meaning for me of meaningful engagement is an engagement that doesn't tell workers what they need, that doesn't make assumption on what it looks, what an effective remedy looks like for them. I recently interviewed a worker, and he said the business recognized the abuse in my case, and they gave me a monetary compensation. And that felt very much like a bribe. I didn't want a monetary compensation. I wanted an apology. I wanted someone to come to me and to say, you were right, we were wrong, we will try for this not to happen again in the future. But nobody bothered to ask him what the outcome of his grievance, the ideal outcome for him for the grievance mechanism would have been. So there is definitely a lack of understanding of how grievance mechanisms should link and be linked very directly to access to remedy in itself. And I just want to make a final point, if I may, on the connection between access to remedy and responsible recruitment. I think responsible recruitment is and can be a preventative remedy mechanism. Many of the grievances that are collected later on in the employment relationship could be tackled at a recruitment level. Awareness of workers of what to expect in the host country, or for example, the rights that are entitled to in the host country, or, and this is a very important point, who is responsible for what? Because at the moment, the responsibility map of all the actors that look and are engaged in the migration journey is definitely not clear, including the responsibilities of states and host countries.
Thanks, Laura. Charles, I know that we have discussed as well that you've seen this disconnect in your work too. Can you maybe share an example of how workers describe their experiences that they may be seeking remedy on with you?
So a lot of times my engagement with workers is a worker comes to me, messages us, comes to in person to our church, and they'll say, I'm tired. They'll say, I need more overtime. They'll say, I don't like my dormitory coordinator. Or they'll say, I just want to go home. All these issues, if it goes to a grievance mechanism, they just kind of dismiss it. Well, overtime is not your right. You want to go home, go home. But then when you talk with the workers, what do you understand? Why does the worker want to go home? He doesn't have his passport, and he has to pay 2 months' wages to break his contract. That's what he's really talking about. When a worker says, I don't like my dormitory coordinator, he's saying is because I have a curfew at 9 p.m. and I can't leave before 7 in the morning. That's why I want to have him removed. When he says I'm tired, it's because I have 16 hours of work per day. The worker will never say that upright. Right before I came here, actually, I do taxes for the workers during the month of May. And one of the workers, I recognized their company. I said, I know your company. And the worker said, yeah, my employer knows you. He doesn't like you. And the reason why is because I obviously helped workers in the past. But then as we were talking, just off of taxes, she says, do you want to see the photos when I was in the hospital? And I said, what do you mean? And she showed me photos. Her face was all swollen. And this was because of the chemicals in the company. And did you report this to anybody? No. And I said, well, why are you telling me now? Well, because you're here with me, you're helping me with my taxes. So I'll share this with you as well. So a lot of the grievance mechanisms, I think it comes from kind of knowing the workers, not just knowing about the workers. And it's the little things that I think we have to pay attention to. A lot of the times workers will come to me and say, I have to pay $3 US for a cleaning fee. It's not on my pay slip, it's paid in cash, there's no receipt. But what they won't tell you is I have all this debt, I don't have my passport. And as the last panel was saying, that The workers don't know that there's a zero fee policy. They don't know they have all these policies in place to protect them because they're not aware of it. And if they're not aware of it, they're not going to be able to use the grievance mechanism that's already available for them.
Thank you. And Lara, what about gender-specific grievances? What does your research suggest about migrant workers' experiences in raising these types of issues through the typical GMs they might come across?
Yeah, I'm smiling because there is a very straightforward answer to this. There is no gender lens in the design or implementation of grievance mechanism. There are some fantastic exceptions, but the norm is that there is no gender lens at all, which means that abuses on women's rights, for example, on women's health, or of course, sexual harassment and gender-based violence go underreported. And my latest research project was done in the UK with migrant workers in the agricultural industry. So a country with a very strong rule of law, with a gender agenda that is widely accepted by the general public. However, there was no gender lens in the grievance mechanism. And we asked growers and buyers, for example, why was that the case? And we had very different answers. So from the growers' perspective, I have to say very transparently, some of them told us, never thought about it. I wouldn't know where to start. So it's more a lack of awareness on where include and what it means to include a gender lens and a safe channel for women to report negative impacts. But then maybe a little bit more problematic, the answer from some of the buyers who told us the majority of the migrant workers employed in the UK are actually male workers. So we don't really see the need for women to have a specific safe channel dedicated to them, which I think is problematic because you are basically saying if you have 100 male workers in a field and just one woman, you don't see the point of providing a safe channel for that woman to report possible abuses, which should probably be revised as a practice, yes.
So I want to pick up on this thread about trust. Charles, you said that trust is the foundation of a successful grievance mechanism. Why is that, and how can companies build it?
Yeah. So just like a small little story is a few years ago, there was a brand who was doing supplier trainings in Taiwan. And they invited me to bring some workers to kind of get their input. And so I brought these 3 Filipino workers, factory workers, to come and sit for like a 3-hour, something like this, very formal session. And we were sitting in the back, and 15 minutes in, the girl says, "Can I have a piece of paper?" And she starts scribbling notes. Now I'm insecure because I'm not taking any notes. But then after, I talked with her as we were waiting for the bus stop. And I said, "Well, what did you think about it?" And she says, "I don't understand." And I said, "Oh my goodness. Let me try to go over like restriction of movement, that means your curfew. Identity documents is your passport." And she said, no, I don't understand why that company cares about me. And I think, wow, that was something that I didn't think about. And I think yesterday one of the panelists said, sometimes we have all these answers, but we're not asking the right questions. And that was this idea of trust. The worker comes to us because they trust us. They don't know why this brand even wants to help them. To them, that's such a foreign idea. And it comes down to is they don't trust the brand, they don't know about the brand, and they don't know about the policies. So I think one of the interesting points is that when I try to help workers understand the grievance mechanism, to kind of trust these brands, I seldom see documents written in the workers' language. So to get stuff written in Tagalog for Filipinos, Vietnamese, and this is true not only of the brands, but some of the CSOs that have great reports. I want to share it with the workers to explain to them, but it's not in their language. And I think that's one of the gaps for trust, is to have stuff in their language. Of course, ideally is being on the ground with the workers, but that's not practical for everybody. But it's using the local CSOs to build trust, and I think pass it along to those who can kind of help.
Lara, does this lack of trust show up in your research as well?
It's an interesting point because I think for grievance mechanism and for workers to feel free and safe to report, you need to have some sort of trust. And what we found was actually that workers did trust their supervisors, which is almost a contradiction because actually very often supervisors are one of the main sources of reported abuses. And I think on this point, something that businesses sometimes don't realize is that the majority, great majority of grievances that are reported informally to supervisors. And it's okay, grievances can be reported informally. This allows for a fast track to solutions in some cases, but then there would need to be a capacity building on supervisors and to be careful on understanding when is the time to escalate an abuse. So we mentioned earlier gender-based violence. In these cases, gender-based violence can be solved and handled in an informal way. It needs to be escalated possibly to the local enforcement, the police. And on the informality, I guess because the fil rouge of our conference this year has been on data and data collection, the awareness of the majority of these grievances being filed in informally means that we do not have data around the type of grievances and the solutions that are followed up to these grievances. So that's a challenge. At the same time, I'm a little bit wary of using data, especially quantitative data related to abuses. And I have to say, I think one point around grievance mechanism and social audits is the over-reliance on social audits doesn't make justice to the abuse, to the abused and the abuses. And social audits in a way allow for a detachment, a moral detachment from the human case. So I'm all in for data. Of course, I'm a scientist, but at the same time, I would be careful in cases of abuses and vulnerabilities to using over-relying on quantitative data.
Great points there, Lara. To both of you, what can companies do to bridge the gap in lexicon and language in terms of these remedy mechanisms and workers?
I think really trying to take down like the highbrow language that we're using when talking with workers. Like restriction of movement. Workers, I don't think comprehend what restriction of movement is. And that sometimes often we just translate it literally, restriction of movement. And Filipino workers come to me saying when it's translated into Tagalog, it doesn't make sense. Same thing I mentioned, retention of identity documents, more details about what that is. I didn't think, one funny story I have with workers is one time I was talking with workers and asking, do you pay a recruitment fee? And the worker says, no, I don't pay a recruitment fee. Okay. Then I ask another worker, do you pay a recruitment fee? No, I don't pay a recruitment fee. And then another worker says, no, I paid a placement fee. And then it was what? I paid a placement fee, but I didn't pay a recruitment fee. And then what we realized is that all the workers understand, I paid a placement fee, but I didn't pay a recruitment fee. So I think it's these granular things that are really important to kind of understand in the context of the worker's experience, not just the worker's voice, the worker's experience. And that's kind of how you bridge the gap between the two.
Thank you, Charles. All right, let's shift to the structural challenges. So grievance mechanisms are really, they're very much about reporting and seeking remedy, but they also need to be complementary to regular dialogue, more meaningful dialogue, more two-way communication. Lara, your research shows that grievance mechanisms, as they are typically implemented now, often really fail to provide meaningful remedy. Why is that?
I think there are a few structural challenges that are common no matter where you operate, whether you are in the UK or Kenya. The first one is that grievance mechanisms are completely detached. They are an afterthought to human rights due diligence, and businesses don't see grievance mechanism and access to remedy as part of their human rights due diligence approach, which will change, I believe so, but at the moment we are not definitely there. I think in the case of migrant workers, another structural challenge is that there is an over-reliance on non-state-based mechanism, and this is because migrants realistically cannot access state-based grievance mechanism and access to remedy, and that's because of their short-term visa or just because of the negative, very negative narrative that that is around the migration movements that make them very wary of referring to state-related forces to ask for help, basically. And I think on the short stay point, another challenge for businesses is to actually conclude the access to remedy process, because sometimes by the time a company has made a decision about what the outcome of the grievance should be, the migrant has already left the country, and so there is no actual conclusion to the remedy process, and this is a challenge for both workers and businesses.
Charles, what's your perspective? Are you, in your work, are companies doing enough to provide remedies?
I think, in my experience, when workers are able to access, because that's the biggest obstacle, once they're able to access the grievance mechanism, remedy takes a long time, sometimes a lot longer than we hope, a lot longer than expected. And I think because of that, as we were mentioning before, during the social audits, what I find is a lot of audit deception. I think there's only been 2 times where a company did everything without deceiving the workers. And I think this is the need to have a clear grievance mechanism and an ongoing conversation with the workers, because what happens is the workers will show me, this is the script I'm supposed to read. This is the document I'm supposed to sign that says I never paid any fees. One of the documents, actually, the worker was said, I'm afraid what I said was misfounded. Please accept this note that I never paid any fees. And it's so absurd, but the workers do it. And the unfortunate thing is, as we mentioned, they don't understand the whole process, what's going on in this room. They don't know the policies in place. So they sign those papers, they go out, and they continue to be deceived because they never knew there was an avenue to raise their voice. And I think that's the biggest obstacle right now, because I feel like if you don't have somebody on the ground, local partners, CSOs, to kind of identify these points, it goes undetected and it goes unremedied. And then the workers themselves never get the help or assistance that they were initially looking for.
So, Lara and Charles, if you could design your ideal grievance mechanism, what would that look like?
So my ideal grievance mechanism is the one that is co-designed with workers, so where the workers actually tell the company is the safest and best way for them to report negative impacts and abuses, is a grievance mechanism where the required or expected outcome is asked for to workers. So it's not just about what happened to you, but also what would you like at the end of this process to see as your result. And then the ideal grievance mechanism to me is a leveled grievance mechanism that can start, and that's perfectly fine in a very informal way, but then it's ready to be escalated to managers, from supervisors, or even to buyers in cases of, most severe cases, I would say,
I think one of the most important things for grievance mechanisms, when I hear from the workers, is having it anonymous. One of the problems we have in Taiwan is the state-based grievance mechanism isn't anonymous. And that's why they really like using an anonymous system, because they're not going to get retaliation. So I think it's having a grievance mechanism that's firstly anonymous, and second, that's ongoing. One of the things I find frustrating is when workers try to use somebody's grievance mechanism, and then later on they have to remember their code, then their password they made, which they often forget, and they don't get the direct communication, whether it be via email, via WhatsApp. QR codes, I think, are also a good point for working. But again, workers don't understand who's behind the system. And that's why I really think it's better if it's video calls too, I think, are another thing. Video calls, workers are so happy when they're able to talk to somebody, even if you're not going to directly help them right away. They just love the idea for remedy that somebody's listening to them. So there are several times where the worker just wants to be heard. And I think a grievance mechanism that actually encourages workers to just explain themselves is a system that I would definitely approve of.
Great. So I think we're really running out of time. We do have some questions, I think. I also have a last question to you both while we're waiting for those questions to come up on stage. So my last question to you both is, what is one piece of advice that you give to companies, consultants in the private sector about building trust with workers when seeking access to remedy? And maybe we can also hear the questions that have come through on the chat as well, and you can choose the ones you'd like to answer.
I think we can address 2 questions. It's fine for you? 2 questions is okay? All right. So the first question is, we want localized, gender sensitive, trusted, and contextual grievance channels, and the brand wants standardized and centralized sellable programs. So how do you balance this tension? That is one. And then another one is access to justice and grievance mechanism is time consuming and eventually stops workers from standing up for their rights. Any comparative studies among the countries that have the best practice or effective grievance mechanism? So if you could address this too. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I know we are a little bit time conscious, so do sort of pick the question that you can answer.
Yeah, I can go ahead. So if I could give one advice to businesses would be, please do be proactive, don't be reactive on grievance mechanism. I know you cringe every time we talk about grievance mechanism, but it's part of your human rights due diligence. So try to share the pain and try to understand that grievances are normal. And if you receive many grievances, that's because you're probably allowing workers to have a voice. So actually, it's a positive thing. And I just want to follow on the contextualize grievance mechanism versus third party and more general supply chain related grievance mechanism. There is no solution. I think operational grievance mechanisms, so the ones that are very specific to your context, are absolutely vital. And I would encourage buyers, if they have to spend some money, to invest the money on very specific contextualized operational grievance mechanism. But of course, yeah, third party and supply chain based grievance mechanisms are equally important.
I think the second question about how lengthy they can be, just talking from experience that, again, keeping the communication with the workers is important. Even if it's going to take a long time, what we tell the workers in advance is, these are the steps that are happening. This is the negotiation that happened. This was the result. And it keeps the workers involved and engaged because they also then get small snippets of what's going on, and it keeps them involved in the process so they feel like there is hope. And then when remedy does happen, then it's a huge win for the workers, but then for everyone else that they share it to.
Great, thank you both. It's been a pleasure to have you on stage with us. And it's really clear that improving grievance mechanisms require systemic change, but it starts with listening to workers and really putting their needs at the heart of the design of these mechanisms and access to remedy. Thank you.
What a great session, and it's such common sense. It's such common sense. It's about engagement. It's about talking in the language of workers, and it's talking within the culture of workers. We were talking about that earlier today as well. There's nothing there that's difficult. There's nothing there that companies couldn't be doing. And also, it's not just access to remedy for workers, which is important. What else might companies learn about their operations if they start engaging with their workforce a bit more? The workers are the ones who know how the work works. What else might they learn if you put decent processes in place? Great stuff. It's now time for our last break. But please be back here at 3:30 for our final two sessions. Thank you.